Good morning. I'm Nick Cushmore from Graham's Technical Development Department, and on behalf of all our panelists, I'd like to welcome everyone to this morning's webinar. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Carl Bloomfield, our moderator for today's session.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nick. As Nick said, my name is Carl Bloomfield. I'm Managing Director of Enterprise Risk and Advisory Services for Graham Company. That means that I oversee our operations that provide risk management consulting, ranging from things like cyber consulting all the way to human capital management, which we're going to focus on this morning. I'm pleased to be hosting or moderating this panel on managing your post-pandemic human capital risk. I want to begin the discussion today by just quickly introducing our panel. First, we have Bill Rizzo. Each panelist will come on, say hello in their name and title, and we'll work through each of our 7 panelists. Bill?
Hello, my name is Bill Rizzo, Quantum Strategies Chief Strategist.
All right, thanks, Bill. Next, Karen Boyle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Boyle. I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at the Graham Company, and looking forward to a good discussion today. Thank you.
All right, next, Ronda O'Donnell.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ronda O'Donnell. I'm the chair of the Employment Practices Group at Marshall, Dennehey, Warner, Coleman, and Goggin in Philadelphia.
Mohammed Bakri.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed Bakri. I'm a partner at Marshall Dennehey in the Products Liability and Premises Liability Department. I'm also the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Marshall Dennehey.
Colby Pellegrini.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Colby Pellegrini. I am an employee benefits consultant with the Graham Company.
Tracy Kilcullen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Kilcullen. I'm Vice President in Claims Services with the Graham Company.
And last but not least, Betty McNee.
Hi, I'm Betty McNee. I'm the Senior Clinical Risk Management Consultant here at the Graham Company.
Great, thanks, everyone. I want to begin today's discussion on why we are going to have this, why are we having this panel? Why is human capital management such an important topic? Obviously, you know, if you could flip to the next slide, please. The pandemic created substantial disruption to all of our lives. You can't go a day without seeing a headline in the newspapers or on TV about things like the Great Resignation, work shortages, employee burnout, mental health. On this slide right here, we see just some of the most Googled and searched phrases down the left-hand column, and some of the headlines that we've pulled from the news, from the headlines from the news. The biggest challenges that I'm hearing today from business owners that I talk to are that they can't find enough workers, or the workers that they find are they're competing against many different companies. They make an offer to somebody, and before that person even starts, that person has accepted another job and they've disappeared. And this has trickle effects throughout the entire organization. I want to reframe the importance of this discussion about human capital management, because I think that a lot of companies view this strictly as an HR concern. They view it as, you know, kind of soft and some fuzzy things that, you know, that's really the focus of our human resources department. But I challenge everybody to think of human capital management really as one of the greatest risks that each company has. Risk begins and ends with our people. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question here. How often have we seen on an insurance company loss run, the cause of loss is human capital? The fact that we didn't maybe do some of the things that we should be doing as business owners, as leaders in our organization. We see the loss runs say things like, you know, this person was struck by, or they hurt their back making a lift. But if we get into the root cause of why a lot of the injuries happen, or the things that go wrong in our business, I bet you we can trace back a little bit further back to things that maybe haven't been done from a human capital perspective. And so today's focus of this presentation, of this panel, is to give you some practical tips on how we can do better in this area, how we can manage our human capital risk, and really start to move the needle and view human capital as a necessity for all business, because it really is at the root of it, the risk that our companies have. And so if we can move forward, I want to begin by asking a question to Bill Rizzo. Bill, in your words, what is human capital management? What is human capital risk, and what's at stake here?
So if I was going to put that in one phrase or sentence, I would say that human capital management is the management of your the management of your employees or the business strategy of your employees and the technology utilized to implement that strategy for the entire workforce. That's kind of the encompassing phrase I would use.
Okay, I think we have a polling question here. Who at your organization takes responsibility for human capital management? Well, I'm happy to see that no one selected no one, and that the largest percentage of respondents selected all the above, because that's exactly right. It really is the concern of everybody in the organization. So I think we're off to a good start here. That, you know, it's no surprise that you're on this panel trying to sharpen your skills in this area. So hopefully we can share some different, some new lessons or new tricks for you. Karen, any discussion about human capital usually begins with attracting and hiring. Like I mentioned before, talent is the biggest struggle for most companies right now. Some company executives that I've talked to say that they're just happy to get a warm body into the seat. You know, what possibly can go wrong with that? What's the cost of a bad hire?
Well, that's a good question, and it's probably a loaded question. So first, let me say that I saw a statistic recently that 76% of hiring managers admit to making a bad hire. So it's not, you know, it's nothing to be, I'll say, ashamed of. We've all done it. I've done it. But where you can really start to see the impact of a bad hire beyond things like, you know, the cost of their salary, the benefits, insurance coverages, training, the people that are training them, time, you know, interview processes and all that. You know, you really need to think about it as an overall, you know, the lifespan of the employee being there. So I've seen numbers from costs of $17,000 all the way up to $240,000. You know, Gallup says half of their salary, all the way up to, in some cases, 2.5 times the person's salary, you know, depending on their position within the company.
Well, that's substantial. What else can go wrong with a bad hire? I want to ask Ronda. Ronda, you probably have visibility into many of the things that employers see that go wrong with bad hires. Can you give us some of your perspective?
So from my perspective, the most substantial way a bad hire can impact an organization is financially, and that's one of two ways. I mean, a bad hire can impact morale and productivity in the business operations, no question. But inevitably, a bad hire, and this is the way I see it, may lead to lawsuits. And what that translates into is attorney's fees, costs, potentially an adverse jury verdict, and potentially dollars to settle the matter. But I think it's important to also remember that impact, while significant financially, can also cost the business from a PR standpoint, because lawsuits are public, and that might lead to lost opportunities for that business. It might, quite frankly, lead to loss in recruiting for that business if the specifics of the lawsuit don't paint a very good picture of the employer and their operations in the workplace.
Great, thanks, Rhonda.
If I could add to that, it makes it just very disruptive for the organization when you do that. Anytime you have that type of disruption, it affects the team and the ability to implement the overall strategy of the company.
Great, thanks, Bill. So we've all made bad hires. Some people would mention or say that the talent pool offers them not many great opportunities. How do we attract a better talent pool? I want to ask Karen and Bill, how companies are differentiating themselves in the talent war? How are you even giving yourselves as an organization the best possible chance of hiring the right people?
Karen, do you want me to start with this? So if I'll start with this, that I think that when you're looking at hiring and retaining employees move to an organization for a variety of reasons: economics, the ability to build their career, flexibility in the workforce. So that if you're at an organization and you are in the right pay scale for comparable companies in your size and industry, and you're still having a problem retaining and attracting employees, I would say that you have to look not at that symptom, but really of what's going on in the organization, because that's where you have to look at the culture of the organization and how that is structured, because people are going to come and leave for those reasons. So that if you're not able to do that, then you have to look at that and say, how do we build a strategy to make it a place where people aren't leaving for an additional 50 cents, $2, or $10,000 a year? What they're leaving, their only time they're leaving is because they don't find that it's the right place for them long term. And then it's your job as the organization to build a strategy to make them have a real career path, which I think we're going to talk about later.
Thanks, Bill. And then I'll just add to that, I think some of the things that organizations now need to be more aware of than ever is, candidates are Googling you. They're looking at Glassdoor, they're asking their friends. I mean, we have candidates at Graham that don't even know anyone at Graham, but they somehow find they have a LinkedIn connection to someone, and they're proactively reaching out to employees here to find out what it's like to work here. So I think Bill's points are all, so important on culture, but there are some things you can start to look at, start to look at your Glassdoor reviews. At Graham, what we do is we look at them every 2 weeks. We want to see what's going on, what's up there. It's easy to do, and you can start to, get valuable insight from what anonymous employee comments, and then, start to do things that really promote your employer brand. And the people that are interviewing need to be clear on what your value proposition is from an employee standpoint. So, making sure that your hiring managers, your HR team are all aligned on the communication and what everyone's saying is the same is going to help you, attract the right type of people.
Right, Karen, you mentioned something there about making sure all the hiring managers are in alignment with vision and mission of the organization. And I'll throw this question out to the panel. In all of your experience, how many organizations, or how often are organizations providing training to the individuals that they have that are making hiring decisions and doing the interview? Any insights on that?
I mean, I can say they're not doing it enough. And I'm sure Betty has good comments too, because she does a lot of this with our Health and Human Services clients. But it's definitely an area where organizations overall can improve. And it just leads to your interviewing process needs to be organized. Like, someone has to own it and own making sure that, people for whatever role it might be are aligned on what do we want, what are the non-negotiables. It takes time, but if you do that the right way, it'll pay dividends for you in the long term.
And additionally, the training is really important for those interviews to make sure they're not saying the wrong thing for liability reasons.
That's true too.
What the goals are for the interview. And so I just think training is something that is not done enough in this area.
And from an employment defense attorney, you can't train enough. The employees or managers at the table making hiring decisions have to be trained, please, because invariably those are the cases that I'm handling. And I want to be clear, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who is a federal agency tasked with vetting out discrimination in employment decisions, one of their strategic enforcement priorities is barriers in recruitment and hiring, period. So their focus is on underrepresented populations, so older workers, minorities, employees with disabilities. They are going to be looking at those type of cases, particularly in workplaces that traditionally are less diverse, meaning technology, the construction industry, the engineering industry. So if there are charges of discrimination filed relative to hiring, the focus is going to be on what happened in the hiring process, what did the employer consider in the hiring process, and quite frankly, were there managers and employees at the table making that decision trained?
And part of that also is documentation of all the resumes that come into your organization through some type of system to do that, which we could talk about later if you would like.
Okay, let's stay on this theme real quick. We're talking about hiring. Betty, you've provided lots of counsel to our clients on attracting talent and interviewing. Talk to us about some of the techniques or some of the interviewing concepts that you talk about with our clients.
Sure. Thanks, Carl. Often, as Karen said, people aren't trained in how to do an interview. I was trained, worked as a director of nursing, and no one ever sat down to show me. Maybe I had a list of questions. And even when I was an administrator for another, 7 years, I heard a ton of people and really had no formal training. Maybe I went to a conference or something that gave me some good interview questions. But typically, people don't have formal training in this area, which means they ask questions where they already know the answer and they want to hear the candidate say how they would answer. So typically people hire people that are like them. And so you may be shorting out your work teams and getting not only some diversity, but diversity of thought, that people actually bring something to the table other than what you bring to the table. So one of the things that we work together with clients to do is first determine the attributes that you need in a position, okay? So a lot of times, and I know everybody on here is not in healthcare, but I use that as my example. So if we're looking for a director of nursing and the former director of nursing was, kind of a loosey-goosey, she let everybody do whatever, and we need more structure in this department, you tend to hire like the drill sergeant, the pendulum swings the other way, and now we need someone who's going to be strict. You've missed the opportunity to look at that position and determine what are the attributes that are needed in that position. Caregivers or in any position, do people have integrity? Do they have empathy? Are they honest? Are they honest people, or do they have tenacity? And the problem with interviewing is you can't just ask somebody, do you have integrity? Because likely they will answer in a positive way. So we do encourage people to use behavior-based interviewing. You can use your favorite search engine to find questions. So for instance, if I need someone who's going to be compliant with safety standards or work rules, for instance, like if we're in a very structured environment, instead of asking people if they are compliant, I will ask them, tell me about a time where you were unable to follow a work rule. Okay, and the only thing, I won't go into a lot of questions here, but if you're going to use behavior-based interviewing, you better interview your people. Train your people in using behavior-based interviewing, because the questions are different. You catch your applicant off guard and they answer differently. And sometimes they get nervous and they give TMI, right? But your folks need to understand how to take those answers and decipher whether that makes the person a good position or they're going to be a good fit for the position.
Great, thanks, Betty. Let me bring it back to where we started this topic of attracting talent. And Colby, I'm curious, how many times when you're talking about employee benefit plans are you also having conversations about human capital management? And then what are some ways that companies are using their total rewards programs to attract talent?
The short answer is all the time. And it makes so much sense, right? With the way the job market is today, companies are devoting so much time, money, and resources to do everything they can to find and recruit top talent. And for all their efforts, many good employees are still walking out the door. Some of that you can't control, but a high ticket item like your benefits package is something that you can. So what that means in today's world is completely different story than it once did. But the last thing you want to hear is that you went through all this work to recruit and hire the right people, onboard and train them, and then to see them just walk out the door because you didn't adjust and refresh your benefits package to meet the new needs of your employees, it's gut-wrenching. So that's why the human capital management aspect has almost joined the employee benefits arena completely to become one holistic approach to attracting and retaining employees.
Right. And Mohammed, I'm thinking about this. They're not just financial levers that you can pull to attract talent, right? The younger generations, more so than baby boomers and Gen Xers, they prioritize meaning and working in a company where the culture, where they can be their authentic selves. Can you talk to us about how employees are tailoring their DE&I programs to attract talent?
So thanks, Carl. So from a D&I perspective, and I think Karen mentioned this earlier about employees Googling, or prospective employees Googling the organization or the prospective companies that they're going to be interviewing with. But from a D&I perspective, employers should be promoting and publicizing its efforts, genuine efforts, not the fluff, not the messaging on social media. I mean, that's all nice and dandy, but if you really want to attract substantive quality employees, you want to promote and publicize your actual efforts. Employees are going on company websites, they're going to the company's career landing page, they're looking for data, they're looking for information. They want to see that there is diverse representation within the C-suite execs, within the board of directors. They want to see employee resource groups that are, designed to help members of the LGBTQ community or employees of disabilities. They want to see that the employer is partnering with the community, diverse communities, partnering with other organizations to promote and to implement D&I initiatives. They want to see data in regards to their employee base. So what you want to do is you want to make, as an employer, you want to make that information accessible. Employees nowadays, especially the younger generations, are looking for transparency, and they're looking for genuine initiatives regarding these types of endeavors. What I often tell people is there are a lot of reasons why diversity matters, why diversity actually makes sense. Some of them are business sense, some of them are moral obligations. And while moral obligations are absolutely nice and they're good and they will make people feel good, overall, you want to have a good idea as to why diversity makes business sense for your organization, and you need to be able to articulate those reasons to the prospective employee. Otherwise, it's not going to come off genuine. Are you doing it because you want to have, please some of your clients who are pushing for diversity? Are you doing it because you believe that diversity, representation, and thought throughout the organization leads to quality work, productivity, leads to less toxic environments? Are you doing it because you think that it's going to lead to better results? You have to be ready to present that data, articulate why it's best for your organization, and why you're actually promoting and implementing those initiatives.
Great, thanks, Mohammed. I want to go back to Ronda. Ronda, are there any trends that you're seeing in lawsuits during the pandemic and post-pandemic?
So I would say with regard to, the area that I practice in the employment world, the pandemic certainly didn't slow down employment-related lawsuits or charges, quite frankly. If anything, it probably increased them. And that has continued. So right now in Philadelphia, where I practice, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, has a Philadelphia office, and they have received such an influx in volume that they are now transferring charges to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations for investigation. They are at a point in their level of charges that the EEOC staff can't timely investigate these this year on their own. And that's even with an increase, quite frankly, in hiring in the Biden administration at the EEOC. So that's significant. But I think more, I guess, concerning, or at least something that we need to consider, is the fact that the other trend that we've noticed this year with regard to employment-related cases that have gone to trial this year, plaintiffs' verdicts are up. Now, I don't think that that is specific to employment law cases, because I think I see that in personal injury cases as well, but it seems that there has been an uptick in high-value verdicts because there's been a shift of jurors' sensibilities in a way. They seem to be motivated, jurors seem to be motivated to help plaintiffs and hold employers, defendants, accountable. And remarkably, from an employment law standpoint, in those cases where there were significant plaintiff verdicts, after jury polling of the reasons why, jurors were holding the employer accountable because they didn't think the employment decision was fair, whether or not it was illegal. And from our perspective, that is significant because it shows the human aspects of the juror verdicts, at least that we're experiencing right now. So there definitely is a difference between post-pandemic jurors and their perspective on the rights of these individuals.
So how does a company deal with the fairness issue? If jurors are making decisions based on fairness and not necessarily the legality, what are some things that companies need to do? I mean, does my earlier comment about when you look at a loss run, an employment practices liability loss run, you don't see human capital management as the issue. You see what the allegation is. But what are companies, what can they do?
Well, I mean, I hate to say it again, but it's training. This is all about training, and it's training of the people that are supervising your employees. The reasons why employees sue their employers are, I'm going to put them in two general categories. It's the my boss is a jerk and my boss doesn't listen category. So you got that. And then the other category is I had no idea that I wasn't doing a good job. And by the way, the other people, they did the same thing and the same thing didn't happen to them. So those are the two categories. And so from a human capital perspective, you got to train your managers, because there may be managers out there, let's face it, my boss is a jerk. That may be enough of an impetus for that employee to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to go talk to a lawyer about this, because whatever he's doing and managing me just has to be wrong legally. And so, that will be the impetus there. My boss doesn't listen to me. Listen, supervisors need to have good listening skills, and they also need to have the ability to have dispute resolution skills. So the employee that brings a complaint to their manager and nothing gets done is an employee who is going to then go to an attorney or maybe a union organizer, quite frankly, to listen to their gripe. No question. So you need to make sure that your managers are trained to understand the things that they can solve, the questions they can answer, and those based upon company policy that need to be taken up the chain to HR. And with respect to the employee that doesn't know they weren't doing a good job, listen, that again is all training your managers to hold employees accountable and provide them with counseling. I mean, the purpose of employing people is to make sure they do their job successfully, and you need to counsel them perhaps on occasion in order to do that. That's an investment the company deserves to have. And when performance issues are not addressed by managers in a timely manner, and then all of a sudden I can't take it anymore, I'm firing this employee, those are when the lawsuits are going to arise, invariably. And discipline and enforcement of your policies, without any hesitation, they have to be uniform and they've got to be consistent. If they're not, they are going to be ripe for potential claims of discrimination.
So it's fair to say that, you know, ineffective performance management can lead to a toxic culture.
No question. Yes.
Agree with that.
Okay, we got to move along a little bit here for sake of time. We've attracted talent by making sure our reputation in the market, our brand is strong, by offering strong total rewards packages. We've interviewed, asked the right questions. We got the right person on board. Unfortunately, according to a Gallup poll, only 12% of employees feel like their company did an effective onboarding. Sounds like we're not even giving ourselves a fair shot if only 12% of employees that come and start and work for a company feel like they were effectively onboarded. And this has got to be much more difficult during a pandemic when sometimes we haven't even met the person. We haven't met them in person, or they're not coming to our office. So Karen and Betty, I want to ask how important is onboarding, and what are some tips that people can do to effectively onboard a new employee?
Sure, I'll start, and then I'm sure Betty will have some comments. So I think that their organizations absolutely have an opportunity with onboarding. I think it's low-hanging fruit, and quite honestly, between getting manager buy-in in the beginning and just some communication between departments, you can implement a really solid onboarding program for not a lot of money. You don't need some high technology solution. It really comes down to, in some cases, communication and being committed to wanting to have a good onboarding experience. So I think, one of the big things I hear sometimes when people or organizations refer to onboarding is they think about it as like a finite amount of time. They think about it as like it's the first week of the employee being at the company. It's making sure they got their key card and they went through the employee handbook, right? So I think all of those things are still very important. But if people can have a mind shift to onboarding really being more of a journey, I think you'll start to see that people and employees are having a much more positive experience. There's a lot of data out there now that shows that it typically takes an employee, no matter the level of employee, anywhere from 8 to 18 months to be fully ingrained in the role and to be able to perform at the highest amount of potential. So, really making sure that you're deliberate about, the employee's experience in the first year to 18 months can have a positive effect on the overall onboarding experience. The other thing I think organizations need to do a better job of, and we do this at Graham, is ask employees, 30 days after they start, what went really well? Did you have any issues? Was the job explained to you? And is the job you are now doing the one that was explained to you in the interview process? It can help you at the same time hone your interviews to make sure that it's giving an accurate representation of the role people are being hired for. There's little suggestions employees can make 30, 60, 90 days after they've been hired that can help you continue to streamline your onboarding processes and how you bring people into your organization. The one other thing I will recommend is that onboarding an employee, when you think about it, takes up a lot of different departments in an organization. So HR is involved, a hiring manager is involved, accounting is involved, IT is involved, office services is involved. So making sure that that group of people comes together, once a year and says, what's working, what's not working, what's clunky about the process, what's not making our employees when they start feel good about, how this all went down. The last thing you want to do is have an awesome candidate experience and then have an employee feel like they were catfished on the first day, right? Like they want to show up and then still feel a good, organized organization where things are put together and they feel like they're being set up for success.
Erin, that is all really great stuff. First of all, I think that our biggest miss as far as supervisors go is that we think that onboarding starts the first day they come to us. Actually, onboarding starts when you make an offer. So this is when your applicant, I call it the cricket time. It's where they get buyer's remorse. They've heard from somebody else. They're like, oh my God, you're going to be working for them. I heard they were terrible, you know, whatever. So what you want to do is start engaging with that new employee as soon as you do the offer. So maybe we're going to do a posting and introduce the new employee to everybody. So I'm gonna inquire, hey, look, fill this out so you can write a little paragraph about you. Your coworkers want to know more about you. I've seen where people, if you're going to be working a 3 to 11 shift, they actually get a postcard from the folks that work 3 to 11. Hey, look, really excited to have you. I just ran into an organization where the chief nursing officer actually sends a text to the new nurse the night before. I know you're nervous. We're excited to have you. We have to stop the ghosting. Everybody has experienced that. They go through 2 weeks, sometimes a month, trying to get a person to come in. They don't even show up for their first day. So it's this kind of stuff. Something simple like all the paperwork that we're going to be reviewing, if you still do it in paper, send them a swag bag with the name of the company, right? And you start really getting on board and engaged with the company before you even get in. I think that's a great missed opportunity. The other part, Karen gave some excellent feedback. You know, are we sitting our folks, you know, in technology rooms to go look at slides on a computer, or is there a part of our onboard that's classroom? Are they are one-on-one? Are they meeting with folks? Are they having lunch or breakfast with some team members? Look at the whole, like, especially that first week. Make certain that it's a mix of different modules, that we're just not sitting, letting people glaze over in either a classroom or learning management system kind of. And also, Karen hit the nail on the head. Feedback. You know, the folks that we're hiring today, if you use like Open Table to make a reservation or something, you can't even get out of the restaurant. They're asking you for your feedback, right? Folks are used to be they've gotten quite used to being asked, what do you think? What do you think about this? What's your feedback? So you better look at how often that we're asking our new employees how things are going, how did things work the first day that you're out with your preceptor? Did things go the way that you expected them to go, or were they different than we told you in the classroom? Ask for feedback constantly, not just an open door. Seek out that feedback from your new employee.
Betty, I want to just add one thing that you mentioned, because I thought your point about the nurse manager texting the person the night before, there is a ton of research and data out there that if the hiring manager is involved in onboarding, the person is 3.5 times more likely to say they had an exceptional onboarding experience. Like, they can hear from me, but they don't care. You know, they hear from me 5 or 6 times before they start. Who cares? They want to like interact with the people that they're going to be working with. So it's a 5-minute phone call. It's a 1-sentence text that is basically free and can go a long way for creating goodwill and making people feel included before they even start. I think that's a really important point to make.
Wow, that's a great stat, Karen. That was something I wasn't aware of. And I'll leave you with another stat, really, to, you know, we started this talk today about what's the risk. Travelers' 2022 injury report found that almost 35% of all work comp claims happen within the first year of employment, and that's in all industry. In the construction industry, it's almost 50%. So how much of this could be eliminated if we did a better job onboarding? Think about the cost of that when it comes to workers' compensation. All right, we're moving on now to developing and retaining talent. You know, we've hired the right people. All of our problems are solved, right? No, unfortunately not. We have a polling question. How often does your company measure employee engagement? So we can see the results there. We still have a few companies not measuring a good number annually, and then happy to see then that the majority are more than twice a year. Employee engagement is a topic we're going to dive deep into during this segment. It's critically important. We want to talk, the first question I want to talk about is burnout and mental health. A Gallup survey found that as many as 79% of workers are experiencing burnout. What can a company do to help with our employees' mental health? And I guess, Karen, if you want to start first, but I'm interested in what a few people on the panel have to say.
Sure. So I think that, burnout and mental health, I think this is a journey organizations that we're just starting on in so many different ways. There's not a ton out there. I mean, there's, applications and platforms, but really getting to the root of it and, helping your employees with burnout and mental health. It honestly goes back to some of the things Rhonda said about avoiding lawsuits. Ask your questions, ask your employees how they are doing, and listen to their responses. And then from there, you can normally create some action items, remind them of resources, let them feel heard. So much of that feeling heard and understanding that other people are feeling the same way can go such a long way, and I think, reminding people of the resources that are available to them, having, sort of campaigns around mental health awareness, it's just going to start to slowly move the needle more and more where people are willing to talk about it more. There's going to be, I think, a surge probably in technology solutions around mental health, but I feel like this is kind of a soft answer because it's not really an answer. It's so different for every organization, but starting the conversation, I think, and owning it and being vulnerable from a leadership standpoint and asking and listening is honestly where I'd start. And then, moving forward with, your specific employee population and just like moving it forward and figuring out what to do next.
Anyone else on the panel have thoughts about mental health and how to help our employees from feeling burnt out?
Well, one way you could that can be dealt with is giving them an opportunity inside the organization to explore different areas of interest inside the company. And I think that if you have career paths set up for people and they're feeling that they love the organization, but the particular job they're doing right now is not as rewarding as they like, there's an opportunity for them to move around and do other things inside the organization.
Yeah, that's great, Bill. Appreciate that. Mohammed, I want to stay on this topic of mental health and toxic work environment. Can you talk to us about what microaggressions are and how they affect employees' emotional and mental well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Carl. There are several, types of conduct that, that might be related to diversity and inclusion that could create toxic work environment. I think that one of the topics that have been in the news and that we've been discussing within this space over the last 4 or 5 years, if not longer, is microaggressions. And generally speaking, microaggressions are any type of insensitive statement, question, or assumption traditionally aimed at marginalized identity groups, but it's not always just marginalized identity groups. For example, microaggression against a Black woman could be, "You aren't like the other Black women I know," which indicates that there is a stereotype for Black women, and this individual doesn't happen to be doesn't fit that stereotype. Whereas one for a white male might be, "Oh, you don't have to worry about fitting in," indicating that white men are always comfortable and accepted in society, that there's a privilege there. And so microaggressions, can come in different forms, and whether they be statements or questions, and they affect everyone. And it's not just something that can occur from a manager directed towards a subordinate. It could be anybody on any level. Microaggressions can impact individuals and can create obviously a lot of resentment, can create toxic environments. And there are studies that have indicated that microaggressions can lead to an increased rates of depression, prolonged stress and trauma, physical concerns like headaches, high blood pressure, and obviously difficult with sleep. Microaggressions negatively impact careers, and they are related to increased, burnout and less job satisfaction. Another study found that 5 in 10 workers said microaggressions would make them consider leaving their job. I think in order to address microaggressions as well as other D&I issues, diversity issues, relationships within the employee pool, you have to push for implicit bias training. I know that there are a lot of areas in this country that hear implicit bias or unconscious bias and they're automatically turned off by it because they assume that just the mere training in regards to implicit bias is an indication that someone is racist. One, implicit bias affects all of us, and it's in regards to a litany of things, such as age, gender, race, ethnicity, disabilities, where someone might be, where someone grew up, where someone was born, where they went to school, political affiliations. It could affect everyone, every race, every gender, and so we all have implicit bias. And until we know what those biases are, we can't work to correct them. We can't work to identify them and then maybe tailor our speech in such a way that we're not, harming others with our speech, our statements, our questions, where there are stereotypes being assumed. So I constantly push for, whether it's in our organization or other organizations, for implicit bias training, because at the very least, it allows us to learn about ourselves and recognize what those biases are. And then the next step, of course, would be how do we address those biases and how do we deal with others once we recognize what our biases are.
Okay, so we did have a question that came in I want to get to before we move on. The question was, I'm curious if you have any specific thoughts addressing burnout in the health and human services industry, specifically among the physician community. Obviously, the pandemic really stressed our healthcare community probably the most. Betty, you might be best to answer that question.
Sure. Well, in the safety department, we have capitalized on this because one way to really engage employees is in their safety and the safety of residents, persons served, or patients in that space. So what happens is, and the reason that's been effective is because safety is the one way you actually convey that we care about our persons served, or residents or patients, and we care about our workers. I know Tracy's going to talk about that in a bit, but when we focus everybody on safety, all of a sudden you're conveying the caring, and we have seen it where it has transferred into improving mental health because supervisors now are really engaged in how folks are doing their jobs, caring about functionally how they're doing that, and even in physicians, what are hazards that affect your day and your ability to be able to perform. And so when people get groups together to talk about safety, they're conveying things that are mental health related, but in that structure, they're actually working on mental health. So besides really looking at benefits, Colby, I know that for the mental health and apps and things like that, I have seen where safety and focusing on that has helped with mental health in physicians as well, all the way through frontline in health and human services.
Great, Betty, you read my mind. I wanted to go to both Tracy and Colby. Why don't we start real quick with Colby? Are there any employee benefits that are available for mental health?
Yeah, Carl, there's a ton. This really goes back to what Betty and Kara were saying. Mental health, it's at the forefront right now, and it's what everyone's talking about. So everything is so instantaneous today in our world. So it's really just about meeting employees where they are, getting them access on their cell phone, because it's not, we're not in the time where we're going in therapist offices anymore. They want to be met where they are in their cars. And I think if employers can take care of that mental health piece, it's going to go a long way with the new generation that's coming in.
Okay, and Tracy, what is the connection between unengaged workers and burnout and workers' compensation? Is there anything we should be doing or can be doing as an organization to help get people back to work faster and get a better outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some obvious answers, which are if you have, an unengaged employee versus an engaged employee, you would probably predict, and correctly so, that someone goes out with an injury, it's probably going to be a slower recovery. You're probably going to see an increased likelihood that they're going to retain counsel. But I also think you're going to see an increase in injuries, both small and more significant, with an employee who's unengaged, over what you would see with an employee who's more engaged. For a long time before the pandemic, we would talk about you have an employee who gets injured, they go out. We would really encourage our HR staff to make sure you or a supervisor, someone who has any kind of connection to that employee, just maintain some kind of contact with them while they're out, because it's really easy to start to feel like you're on an island, to start to feel like, no one cares that I'm sick, or no one cares that I'm hurt, or that I'm not there, my team doesn't even miss me, whatever it might be that starts spiraling through your employee's head. And then when they're at home and they start seeing those ads for workers' comp attorneys, they're probably more likely to call that attorney because they're just feeling like they're all alone on this island. I think in the post-pandemic environment, that challenge has sort of evolved, because you still have that conundrum. How do you find the time to make sure you're maintaining that connection and you're doing it the right way? But you also have employees who are on the job possibly feeling that way because of increased workload, all the things we talked about today. Employees feeling like they have a greater predilection for burnout because there's more work being put on them because you're experiencing more turnover. Or you have the hybrid work environment where employees are being onboarded in a virtual world, or they're not in the office every day or surrounded by their teams, and you have that human contact element. So if you're a single person who works from home the majority of the time, you might start to feel a little less connected to your coworkers, your supervisor, or your company and their mission, or the people and products that they're serving and distributing. So you're more likely to just feel like, well, if I'm hurt, what does it matter? How is that going to affect my employer or my mission? And I'm just going to go and get hurt, take some time off, and get a vacation. But it's a big impact on the organization. You want to make sure that people feel engaged and feel like a part of that team. It's a challenge, and depending on the industry you're in, you might have to get creative in how you do it, but I think you'll reap the benefits of doing it, not only in keeping your employees from getting injured and keeping them working, but you're probably going to have greater morale. You're going to have people who are great stewards of what you're doing in the community. And something Ronda mentioned before really resonated with me, that while you're asking me about work comp and how how that's being impacted by the unengaged employee, it's not just work comp that we're seeing those impacts. You're seeing it in auto accidents. You have unengaged employees that are just maybe not following driver training, or who haven't received training in a long time because of the pandemic. They're out there and they could get into an accident. That directly impacts your company and the bottom line. You have general liability risks, professional liability risks in the world that Betty just described, where if you have an unengaged employee and they're providing care to another human being, they're more likely to cause an injury. So they might get hurt, but they're also going to hurt someone else, and you're going to have two losses. You're going to have a work comp claim and a lawsuit on your hands. So it's definitely something that should be a big focus of any organization. How do we maintain engagement? How do we measure it? And how do we make sure that we're doing a good job at fostering it?
Great, thanks, Tracy. Great comments. We did get a question on the subject of burnout, and the question is about many employees feel like it's impossible to take PTO, to take time off. Our jobs now, that we're home, or it's workforce has been going this way. It's a 24/7 immediate response. In the situation where we have a single employee that's responsible for something, they feel like they can't ever take time off. How are companies addressing this, or what are some suggestions that people can do so that people can actually take time off and recharge, not get burnt out? Anybody on the panel?
So I can quickly comment on this. So I think it's always tough when there's one person that does the role, right? Because obviously we're all hiring people that, are hard workers in most cases. They don't want to let any of their colleagues down. They want to be available when they need them. So the one thing that you can do is obviously have that person at least cross-train someone else in the bare minimum, right? So you're not going to have to hire or completely train someone else on that person's responsibilities, but the 911 things that okay, if I'm out and this comes in, this has to get done. So that is one opportunity so that person can take some time off. The other thing, and this was a suggestion someone else gave me, but I liked it, is the manager says to the person, I want to know right now the next time you're going to take a PTO day. Let's plan for it now. Let's get out ahead of it. We will make sure there is coverage. You know, the next time you want to take vacation, you know, you're at a loss when you don't plan for it. You know, if someone like that wants to take a last minute one, but if you can plan for it ahead of time, then it ultimately, the person will have a better experience too when they're off, because you put the right things into place so that people like that in those positions can take some time off. But it's also, you know, leadership from the top. Like if you're going to say it as a leader, you have to do it too. So you have to be really careful that you're also not sending mixed messages to your employee population. So it's a cautionary tale. We struggle with it at Graham, to be honest, but you really need to, you know, you need to put your, you know, your money where your mouth is. If you're going to tell your people to take time off, don't bother them when they're taking time off. Don't, you know, send them a text and start it with, sorry to bother you. Don't bother them. I know it sounds, you know, simple, but it's hard, you know, when you need something, you think that you need it right away. But those are some suggestions that people can try to implement.
And I would just add to that it's really important for the business risk itself to have people cross-trained in every function. There's always an emergency that can happen, that person unexpectedly has a health issue or something. No one else can do that role. That puts, you have business risk there.
Right. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Karen. Great suggestions. I've even heard of an organization that in order to answer their email while they're off, they have to like request a password, or they have to go through some process to be able to access their email when they're on PTO. So,
I've heard of that. That's a good one. I've heard that too. That's a creative one. I like that.
Yeah. All right. If you can advance the slide, I think we have the PricewaterhouseCoopers 2022 Global Workforce Hopes and Fears Survey here. I wanted to show you this because the results are somewhat interesting. Maybe some people are, you know, more in tune to this than I was. But if you look, obviously the very first thing that comes across as the most important for workers is their compensation. Being fairly compensated still is the number one thing that of the respondents, people that were surveyed. But look at what's number two. I find my job fulfilling. And number three, closely behind it, is I can truly be myself. This was pretty eye-opening to me. And I want to ask Betty, you know, what's your reaction to hearing about the importance of meaning, that, you know, finding my job fulfilling is the second most important thing to employees that were surveyed?
I think it's really important. Initially, we heard about like millennials that they really have to have a greater purpose than what they do. I think it's made us rethink. Everything in the pandemic has made us all rethink employment, relationships, and what it means to be working and have some value out of that. So typically, I've talk with people that whether they work in a nonprofit environment where they really get connected to the mission of the organization, or even in a for-profit business where they can get plugged into our goal of our company, or maybe they're an ESOP, and they can get really plugged into the success of the organization. This is huge because everybody wants to know that their little piece, their 8-hour shift or whatever, is making a big difference. And I think when organizations can, you know, share the bigger picture with employees, whether it is on mission or success of the organization, or to see the outcomes of what you do on a day-to-day basis, this is going to keep your employees more engaged, more fulfilled during that time they're working, and they just have a greater sense of purpose. We also like to keep people engaged in safety because, you know, when you can get people engaged in caring for their coworkers and working safely, or if you have a person served, like a population that you're caring for folks is very fulfilling, especially for the people that are caregivers by nature.
Great, thanks, Betty. I want to dive a little deeper into engagement. How do we measure engagement? How do we even know if our workforce is engaged? Karen, do you have any tips or any suggestions on how companies can measure their level of engagement?
Yes, so I know we did the poll earlier, so it's great to see that, organizations are surveying their people. So I think the first thing to start with when it comes to engagement is surveying your people, finding out if you're not doing it now, get your baseline. But a cautionary, tale I'll say is that if you're not ready to act on the data, do not survey your people. I think that's the most important thing if you're thinking about getting started on your engagement journey, is if you're going to survey your people and ask for honest responses and want to continue to get their feedback, you need to show that you listen to the responses and are making actionable change to whatever areas come through in your first survey. I think the companies that do it twice or more have a better opportunity to improve their engagement versus organizations that are only doing it once a year. We at Graham do it 3 times a year. And really we do that, one, because then we can meet with the managers, to review the results from their teams. And then we really create a roadmap for, okay, what are we going to do right now for the next 3 to 4 months to see, how we can make improvements. And, you can't, with engagement, it's tough. You can't boil the ocean, right? So you got to start in the different areas that your engagement surveys show you and focus on, okay, these are the two areas right now for this year we're going to focus on. And I think what you'll start to see is they all start to have a positive effect on the other areas that might, be low as well from an engagement, profile or whatever you're measuring. The one thing I'll also say about engagement is I think we're going to start to see engagement correlating a lot to this idea of burnout and well-being. So I think, that's going to start to be a bigger part of engagement and how employees are surveyed going forward, asking about burnout, asking about employee well-being. So I think we should all be prepared for that. The mental health and the burnout, that's going to start to be a big driver of engagement.
Great, thanks, Karen. Colby, I was curious, before we have to move on to the next section, how are companies engaging with their employees to find out what's most important to them from a total rewards perspective?
Yeah, so the tried and true method we heard from Betty and Karen, it's really surveying employees and getting their feedback. A lot of companies have asked questions in exit interviews as well, but how honest are people on their way out? So I've been seeing a lot of companies adding this into their interview process, actually, where employers are asking recruits what they would like to have as part of their total rewards package. It shows a willingness for an organization to change and adapt with the times, and it immediately shows that recruit that their ideas are going to be valued in the company.
Great, thanks, Colby. And last, before we move on to employee experience, Bill, you talked about career pathing a few minutes ago. You mentioned that as a way to help with engagement, employees knowing that they have a career path and maybe they won't be stuck in one job. Talk to me how the best companies are developing their talent and what role performance management plays in this.
Sure. So when we look at performance management, there's a lot of different, philosophies and ways of doing that. One of the things that we really preach is the maximum accountability, which is, kind of based on a lot of the military way of building teams and evaluating those teams. And kind of what we do here is that we're looking at really the organization, or the CEO sets the goals for the entire organization. And then once those goals are set for, a quarter, a year, but we like to look at a quarter, and you're looking at that, then what you do is that CEO delegates to his direct or his or her direct reports, and then those goals are directed down to their people. So when you have it that way, you have a clear look of everyone's goals of what they need to do, and that solves that problem that was spoke about a little bit. What's their contribution? Because everyone knows, because if they're delegating each role down the chain of command, everyone knows what their task is. If it's from sweeping the floor in a factory to, being a nurse someplace, they know what their go with their job, how it impacts the whole organization going forward. So that's how our goals, when we look at the performance management of that. And then the team building and succession planning on that part is when you have career development goals and you're meeting with your people on a quarterly basis to review that stuff, the manager works with them to say, hey, where do you want to be in 1, 3, 5 years? And you develop a plan for that person. So we call it a career success manual, so that you know all the things that they need to do to get to the next step in their career, and they know, and the manager is engaged with them. And then if they say that, they want to be, if they're a manager or they're a junior person and they want to move to this other position, what is the skill gaps that they need to get to that next position? And you develop a strategy for them with, if you have a learning management system or not, so that they know exactly what they need to do to meet their goals. And it helps them engage. It helps you deal with the career succession planning. It helps with the issue of the burnout. That really, to me, is the essence of solving a lot of the problems, is really having a career success manual for every one of your employees.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Moving on to the employee experience. I want to start with Colby. How are perceptions about total rewards, benefit packages? How has it changed pre-pandemic to post-pandemic?
I mean, it's just reinforced what we already knew. So, I mean, pay has always been a deciding factor, but now it's about the benefits. What's going to tip the scale, and what's going to differentiate your company when you're going out for recruiting. We talked about mental health. That's huge right now, and it's really just about meeting people where they are. And I think from the employee's perspective, they want to feel that their employee, that their employer sees them and cares about what they're going through. So I know one of the innovative things that a lot of larger companies are doing right now, they are implementing value-based plan designs. So they are essentially incenting their employees to get the highest quality care. So it reduces readmittance rates. It's also better outcomes for their employees. So I know, like Lowe's, for instance, they are sending employees who have cancer to the Mayo Clinic. So they're putting them up free of charge just to make sure that they get the best quality of care. So it's just tenfold of what employees perceive the benefits as pre-pandemic.
And Colby, just a quick follow-up on that. What would you say, in your opinion, is the most sticky benefit from a retention standpoint? What benefits are we offering that really tend to be the most sticky to help us retain our employees?
Yeah, there's a couple that stand out, like vested PTOs, vested 401ks, the benefits package in general, strong mentorship program geared towards career development. In regards to the benefits, I mean, it's twofold. It's really focusing on the expenses that are most meaningful to your employees. So if you can create a plan that has easy copays for primary care and specialist visits, you can do this even if you have high deductible plans. So employees know what they're going to pay for their most frequent visits. And then the second is pharmacy. The worst thing that your employees can do is go to fill a prescription when they are prescribed a drug to better their health, and the price tag's too high for them to take it or to continue it. So what a lot of employers are doing right now, and some of them don't even know that it's out there, but there are a lot of manufacturer grants and assistance programs. So if your employees are able to sign up for this, and it really just comes down to communication, it will bring the cost of the drug down to zero for the employees. And then for the employer, it will completely eliminate this from their total spend. So those are two ways.
And is there any impact on the company for these types of programs, or for that?
There's not. So the cost goes to zero for the employee, and then for the employer, it completely removes this from their pharmacy plan. And it's paid for by the manufacturer itself. And it applies to a certain amount of employees who fall under a specific threshold of income, which is around $100,000 for a single.
Oh, great information. I want to talk to the tire panel now and get everybody's thoughts. What is it that our employees are looking for from their employers? I mean, should we as the employer just expect that we're going to get the best from our employees because we give them a paycheck? Or do we need to motivate and lead them and incentivize to get the best out of them? We hear about quiet quitting. A lot of employees are kind of just, mailing it in. They're doing the bare minimum. They're earning their paycheck. What, as business owners on the call here, as business leaders, let's have an open discussion. What are our employees looking for from employers, and what can we do to get their best?
I'll start. I think that, again, to me, the biggest thing after compensation, it's having what you're contributing to the company, what the effects of what your contribution is to the success of the entire organization, and that that this is not a job for you, it's a career, and that someone above you cares about you enough that they take time to meet with you and help you develop and mentor you to give you the right opportunities and training to advance your career. That's what I think is the biggest issue.
Right. So Bill, you actually mentioned the third item on that list, third most important, was knowing that you're cared for.
Correct. Yes.
Karen, I think I cut you off.
I was just gonna say, Bill, I agree with you. There's, between, April and September of 2021, right, 24 million people left their jobs. And there's been I've been reading some really interesting, I'll say, research on this to figure out, okay, why were people leaving? Because we've all heard about wage compression and people leaving for big offers, more than they were making wherever they currently are. But toxic culture was 10 times more of an indicator of someone leaving an organization than compensation. So I think, Carl, you asked a good question, like, do we just ride the wave of like, what do employees want? And we have to give them, things that, 10 years ago, we wouldn't dream of giving them. Maybe in some cases, yes. But ultimately, like, the thing that we all need to do as employers is take a full on self-assessment of what is our culture. Why are people leaving? And, the thing about, if you have a toxic culture, so much people talk about culture as like a whole entire organization. There are little mini cultures all throughout organizations. So you really, if you want to talk about engagement, employee well-being, burnout, like, you really need to look inside and make sure that your people are being treated with respect. That, Rhonda, you mentioned the manager that was just a jerk, so it sent them, to file a suit. Like, that's a big deal. If you have people in your organization that aren't treating people the right way, people just want to come to work and feel good. It's not about like a ping pong table and, all that for the most part. They want to feel appreciated. And some of that goes into the, how you plan your benefits, how you incentivize them, making sure that your pay is obviously competitive and all of that. But at the end of the day, if, people get a pit in their stomach when they walk in the door, you're not going to be able to hold on to your talent.
Yep. Karen, in Health and Human Services, there's some information out. Of course, and I think that applies to many industries. If people have at least 2 friends at work, they are less likely to leave a position. They like coming to work. They want to see their friends. And, I just think back when I started as a manager, we didn't want friends on the work team. And you know what? A supervisor was never allowed to be like friendly, right? This is a shift. First of all, that means if you want supervisors to be friendly to their employees and create a good teamwork and good communication, you better make certain that supervisor is someone that they can respect. So you might have to do some supervisor training, make sure they're appropriate, but do facilitate people being friends at work. Of course, that makes certain that wage is in line and everything, because friends aren't going to trump that, but make certain they like and respect their supervisors and that they like the people they work with. I also see major flexibility requests. So like in Health and Human Services, where people work in 24-hour, not one person, but we're a 24-hour business. So things like flexible holidays or not being required to work over a holiday period. Maybe people are breaking up shifts. They only have like a 4-hour requirement, so they can get back to their house and cook Thanksgiving or whatever that is. Extreme flexibility. And as Bill said, opportunity. If I want to climb the ladder, how are you going to help me get there?
And I'm not an HR professional here, full disclosure. I'm usually talking about the claims after they happen, but in my experience, working with my own team and just, seeing how our culture has evolved at Graham, I think allowing your employees who are perhaps newer to the organization or more junior opportunities to share ideas that they have. You can't assume you know it all because you've been here a while. Some of the best ideas come from people who are coming in with fresh eyes or a fresh perspective on the job, the workplace, the world, and giving them the chance to share the idea, and then also giving them credit for it. If it's a great idea that you're going to implement that's going to work, people want to feel like they've made a contribution that means something to the organization and get recognition for it.
Carl, the only thing that I'll add to this is we need to train the trainers. This is just one factor. I think everyone has expressed an opinion in regards to a bunch of factors that were absolutely necessary. I was in the room with a bunch of department heads here at the firm, and we all looked around and asked ourselves, what's going on with attrition? Why are we losing so many attorneys? And then someone asked, well, why are all of you here? Because we had anywhere from 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years on that table alone. And everyone pretty much said the same thing. We worked for somebody who cared about us, who helped us develop our careers, develop ourselves as litigators. We had mentors, we had individuals who were interested in us developing as human beings and as employees. And I think we're missing that. I look around and I see a lot of people who are walking into their office, they close the door, they do their work, and they're great. They're great at what they do, but they're not checking in on their associates. They're not checking in on their employees, and those associates are looking to be mentored. And if they find it somewhere else, they're going to leave. So I think one of the things we need to consider is actually allocating resources to training our trainers.
What are some of those resources? Anybody have any suggestions? Where does somebody go when they're looking for training? What are the types of, resources available or organizations that specialize in this? Not to give a commercial for any particular firm or not, but where do we start?
Is that a softball question, Carl, for me? So Quantum Strategies does that type of training across the board. So I'm not trying to advertise, but that's.
So the idea, there's professional firms out there that do this.
Correct.
I mean, briefly, over the last several years, when we started our diversity and inclusion committee, the committee is made up of significantly a bunch of attorneys, litigators, some HR employees, and some marketing and some other admin. None of us had actually had to implement any D&I committee, any D&I initiatives or programs. We were, we might be a part of that space outside of the firm, but it was never our day job. And so we had to do a lot of research. There are a lot of different consultants out there. There's individual consultants that will work to implement these types of programs. There are organizations, massive organizations, that will work with the entity, the employer, to either roll out training or workshops, or they'll do the training themselves. So there are a lot out there. This is a ever increasing field, and there's a lot of opportunity there. So there's a great deal of organizations that are trying to get into that field that might not actually have the experience. So you do need to do your research before picking one, but there are a lot of resources out there, big and small.
Great, thanks everyone. We're getting close to the end here. We did have another polling question, and I do want to leave a few minutes for any questions from participants. If you want to show the polling question. When it comes to human capital management, where does your organization have the most room for improvement? Developing and retaining talent. A little bit surprised to see onboarding for success. We had no one. Our stat must be incorrect. But while we have a few minutes left here, any final points on developing and retaining talent that any of the panelists want to leave us with, since that's the area that most people need the most help?
Carl, I'd like to jump in first on that, on retention. Before we talk about our open positions and how we need to recruit and retain, we've got to take care of our incumbents. We've got to make certain that we are looking at that work environment, making certain the culture is right, because if not, when you go to recruit staff and onboard them, you're bringing them into a bad culture and you're just going to be a turnstile at that point. So make sure you prioritize caring for your incumbents as much as you do for attracting talent.
So, and can I add to that? I would first like to say that the poll that no one on the onboarding, that probably is something that they don't realize there's a problem in the onboarding. A lot of people, and there is a problem when people come aboard, is what my sense is on that, because it is a challenge for a lot of organizations. But when it comes to again, it's really setting up the structure where that, I agree with you 100%, Betty, about the culture internally and getting that right. But if you do behavioral testing and analysis, that's before they come aboard, the new members, you can share that with the existing team members so that you get a better way for them to communicate with each other once they're there. There's a lot of good information out there in those areas, and then really giving them the career goals and how the team fits together and making those teams work effectively, I think, is the answer.
Carl, I agree with Betty as well in regards to culture. From a D&I perspective, employees want to make, they want to ensure that the D&I initiatives are actually legitimate. They want to ensure that the company or the organization's D&I initiatives and programs are actually receiving resources, money, legitimate money, a budget, because otherwise to them it's just lip service and it's fake, and then that will have a two-pronged effect. It's going to make them distrust their employer and then also believe that the culture isn't actually there. They want real substantive educational programs. They want people to be held accountable. They want to see numbers change, and they want to see data collected. They want to actually have transparency. They want to see that there are promotions, that there are diverse individuals at all levels. And I think at the end of the day, we're no longer talking about whether D&I matters or whether D&I makes business sense. The question is, what actions are organizations and companies taking to create a more diverse and inclusive workspace? And what are they spending on it at the end of the day? What's the budget?
Great. So I want to leave you with, how can your organization survive? Here are some tips. Hopefully during the course of our panel discussion today, you took away some ideas, got some ideas, and have some new strategies that you can employ at your company. On behalf of the Graham Company, Quantum Strategies, and Marshall Dennehey, all of our panelists, we thank you for spending time with us. We do have 4 minutes for questions if you have them. Like we said earlier, all of the bios of the speakers will be provided to you. If you need to reach out to somebody individually after this presentation, please feel free to do so. Again, thank you. If you have questions, we'll stick around and answer those for you.
Carl, this is Nick. I would also just like to remind the audience, for anybody that does want those continuing education credits, please view the handout section and fill out that evaluation form and your CE credit requests. I'm also going to bring up one last polling question. Traditionally, prior to the pandemic, we would host these sessions in our office in Philadelphia. So I want to poll the audience to see, are people at the point where they might be ready to come back? So please answer this question if you're still out there in the audience. We'd like to get a sense, right, if there's a new format, for future educational sessions, would you like this to continue virtual? Would you like to come into the office, or do you like the option of a hybrid session where you can attend virtually or in person? And it looks like that hybrid option is a clear winner. Flexibility, that's another key message we're hearing.
Well, thanks for that information. Again, feel free to reach out afterwards if there are any questions directly to the panelists. Appreciate your time. Everybody have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you again, Carl, for having us.